My name is Laurel Voss. I'm 43 years old. For 11 years, my mother sent a Christmas card to everyone she knew. Her church friends, her book club, her neighbors on Sycamore Drive, her college roommate in Vermont, my father's former colleagues, distant cousins I'd met twice at funerals. And in every single one of those cards, in the family photograph on the front, I was not there. Not cropped out, not forgotten by accident, absent by design, year after year, with the particular consistency that can only mean intention. The card always showed my mother, Margaret Voss, looking trim and cheerful in coordinated holiday colors. My younger brother Garrett, taller every year, grinning with the easy confidence of someone who has never once questioned his place in the family. And my stepfather, Roland, who had married my mother when I was 19 and who regarded me, from the beginning, with the careful neutrality of a man who has decided that ignoring something is the same as handling it. 11 cards, 11 years, sent to an estimated 240 households. Last October, I sat in the office of an estate attorney named Douglas Crane, across a mahogany desk that was older than I was, and watched him open a manila accordion folder. Inside were 11 Christmas cards, each one in a labeled clear sleeve. My grandmother, Nora Voss, had kept every card she'd received for 60 years. She had kept mine too, sent separately, every year with a handwritten note inside. And when she died and Douglas Crane opened her files, there they were, the evidence of 11 years of erasure, and the evidence that someone had seen it all along. "Your grandmother was very organized," Douglas said, in the measured tone of a man who has delivered complicated news for 30 years. "And she left very specific instructions. Before I tell you what those instructions were, please like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love connecting with every one of you. Now let me take you back to where this all started. I grew up in Millfield, Wisconsin, the older of 2 children from my parents' first marriage. My father, Thomas Voss, died of a heart attack when I was 14 and Garrett was 10. My mother grieved and regrouped with a speed I didn't understand until I was much older. By the time I was 17, she was dating Roland Acker, and by the time I left for college, she was engaged. My grandmother Nora, my father's mother, was 72 when my father died. She lived 20 minutes away in a small white house with a sun porch she called her thinking room. She grew tomatoes every summer and played piano badly and happily on Sunday mornings, and wrote letters by hand because she did not trust email to carry the weight of the things she wanted to say. She had loved my father the way mothers love sons, completely and without reservation, and when he died, she transferred a significant portion of that love to his children, to Garrett and to me. But especially to me, I think, because she could see what I was losing. Not just my father, the shape of the family that was quietly being reorganized around his absence. The Christmas card started the year I turned 22. I was in my second year of teaching elementary school in Madison, living in a studio apartment with a radiator that clicked, and a cat named Gerald who sat in the window and watched pigeons with the intensity of a professional. My mother called me in December of that year to say she was sending a family photo for the card, and it was easier not to coordinate everyone, which I understood to mean easier not to include me, since Garrett was still living at home and Roland was already there. I said okay. I thought it was a one-time thing. The next year I called in November and asked about the card. My mother said the photo had already been taken. When I asked why I hadn't been told, she said I was always so busy and they hadn't wanted to bother me. The year after that, she didn't mention it at all. By the 4th year, I had stopped asking. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from requesting something that should be offered freely, a degradation in the asking itself that accumulates over time. I stopped asking. I started sending my own separate card to the people in my life, including my grandmother, including the old family friends who I knew received my mother's card and would notice my absence. I never said anything about it in my own cards. I just wrote warmly and signed my name and let people draw their own conclusions or none at all. My grandmother drew conclusions. She called me every December after the cards had gone out, and she never mentioned my mother's card directly. But she always said some version of the same thing. "I got your card, Laurel. It's the one I'm putting on the mantelpiece this year." Just that, every year. the one on the mantelpiece. I came to understand over time what she was doing with that sentence. She was not offering pity. Nora Voss did not do pity. She considered it an insult dressed up as tenderness. What she was doing was witnessing. She was telling me, in the only language that wouldn't embarrass either of us, that she had noticed, that she had counted, that she was keeping track in some way I didn't fully understand. She never spoke against my mother directly. She had her own complicated history with Margaret, a daughter-in-law she had loved because my father loved her, and then a woman she had watched reshape the family after his death into something he would not have recognized. She kept those feelings private with a discipline I came to deeply respect, but she kept showing up. Every holiday she could get to, she was there. Every summer, she had me to her house for at least a week, without Garrett or Roland or my mother, just the two of us and Gerald the cat when I brought him one year, and the garden and the piano and the long, unhurried conversations of people who have decided to be honest with each other. She told me once, sitting on the sun porch with the afternoon light coming through the windows the way it only does in late summer, that she had been keeping something for me. She didn't say what. She said, "When I'm gone, Douglas Crane will tell you." I thought she meant money, and I told her she didn't have to, and she waved her hand the way she waved her hand when you'd missed the point. "It's not about the money, Laurel," she said. "It's about the record." I didn't know until after she died what she had been doing in the background. She had been building a file. The pattern had a clearer shape than just the cards, of course. It always does. The cards were the most visible expression of something that ran through the whole texture of family life. When I was 25, I drove 4 hours to Millfield for Thanksgiving. My mother had renovated the guest room, the room that had been mine when I lived at home, into a craft space for herself. She had not mentioned this. When I arrived with my overnight bag, she told me cheerfully that I'd be more comfortable at the Holiday Inn Express on Route 9. She had already looked up the rate, $89 a night. Roland had, she mentioned, a lot of work spread out in the guest room, and it would be inconvenient to move things. I drove to the Holiday Inn Express. I paid $178 for 2 nights. I ate Thanksgiving dinner at my mother's table and helped with the dishes and drove home on Friday afternoon. When I mentioned it to my grandmother, she said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I'll give you the guest room from now on, if you're willing to drive the extra 20 minutes. I drove the extra 20 minutes for the next 15 years. At 29, I got engaged to a man named Peter Halloran, a high school history teacher who was kind and funny and who made very good soup from scratch. I called my mother to tell her. She said congratulations and asked if we'd thought about where we were going to have the wedding. When I mentioned we were considering a venue in Madison, she said she hoped we weren't expecting Roland to pay for anything because they were watching expenses, and also that Roland's daughter from his first marriage was getting married that same summer, and you can understand how that changes things. I had not asked Roland for anything. I had not asked my mother for anything. I had called to share news that I was happy about. We were married in September, small and lovely, 38 guests, a garden venue that cost $4,200 all told. Peter's parents contributed $1,500. My grandmother gave me $3,000 and a letter that said, among other things, "Your father would have danced with you and cried about it for a week. I'll be doing both for him." My mother came to the wedding. She sat in the 3rd row. She did not offer a toast. The Christmas card that December showed her and Roland and Garrett at what appeared to be a ski resort. Peter and I were not in it. 3 years after the wedding, Peter and I had our daughter, Maya. She was born in April. Small and loud, and immediately the person I would have walked through fire for without a second thought. I called my mother from the hospital. She congratulated me and said she'd try to get up to Madison soon to see her. She came 6 weeks later, stayed for a single afternoon, and spent most of it asking whether we'd thought about sleep training. Maya turned 2 in April of the year my grandmother turned 89. That Christmas, the family card showed my mother, Roland, Garrett's wife Becca, and their 2 boys. Peter and I had been sending holiday cards for years. Maya was 2.5 and had very strong opinions about the color red, and could say Christmas tree with startling clarity. The card my mother sent to 240 households that December had 4 adults and 2 children on the front. My daughter, my mother's granddaughter, was not among them. That was the year I stopped being sad about it and started being clear-eyed. There is a difference between those two things, and the difference matters. Sadness hopes for something. Clarity sees what is actually there. What was actually there was a woman who had made a choice, consistently and deliberately, for a decade and counting, and who was going to keep making it until something changed. I could not change her. I could only decide what I did with what I knew. Grandmother Nora died 22 months ago, at 91, in her sun porch, in the chair she called her good chair, with a cup of tea that had gone cold beside her. She had made her arrangements with Douglas Crane 4 years before her death, with the thoroughness of a woman who had spent 91 years understanding that the things you love require protection. She left the house to a local historical society, as she'd always intended. She left her piano to the church. She left her tomato garden notes, actual handwritten notes, 3 decades of them, in a series of green notebooks, to her neighbor Ruth, who had been gardening alongside her for 20 years. And she left the accordion folder to Douglas Crane, with instructions. The folder held 11 Christmas cards from my mother, each in a labeled clear sleeve. Beside each one was a card she had received from me that same year, in a matching sleeve. She had dated and labeled every pair. She had written, in her handwriting, on a single index card clipped to the front of the folder, "For Douglas, for Laurel. She should know she was always seen." She had also left me $140,000, not the house. She'd made her feelings about property clear. But a savings account built over decades that she had been adding to quietly since I was a child. Douglas showed me the statement. The account had been opened in 1989, the year I was born. She had never mentioned it to anyone. I sat in Douglas Crane's office for a very long time after he finished. The folder was on the desk between us with all 22 sleeves, 22 cards, 22 years of correspondence between me and the woman who had kept the only real count of what my mother had been doing. The afternoon light moved across the mahogany desk. A clock somewhere in the building ticked. I thought about the sun porch in summer, about the piano played badly and happily, about the phone calls every December, the same sentence, the mantelpiece. About the afternoon she'd told me it wasn't about the money, it was about the record, and how I'd thought I'd understood what she meant, and how I had not quite understood until right now. She had spent 11 years quietly and methodically doing what my mother had spent 11 years quietly and methodically undoing. One woman erasing, one woman documenting. And in the end, the documentation was in Douglas Crane's office, and the erasure was in a landfill somewhere, and they were not, it turned out, equal forces. Douglas gave me the time. He didn't fill the silence with words, which I was grateful for. Finally, I said, "She had them all." He said, "Everyone." I asked if my mother knew about the estate. He told me that the will had been filed and that my mother, as next of kin, had been notified of its contents. He asked if I'd like to be present when it was formally reviewed with all parties, or if I preferred to handle things separately. I said separately. The formal reading happened 3 weeks later, with Douglas and my mother and Garrett present. I was not there. I had no need to be there. My portion had already been communicated to me privately, and what I felt about the Christmas cards and the accordion folder and my grandmother's index card was mine alone, not a thing to be performed in front of an audience. But Douglas told me afterward, when I called to thank him, that my mother had been very quiet during the reading, that she had asked once about the folder, that he had told her, in the measured way he had, that Nora had left specific instructions about who received what, and that the folder was accounted for. My mother called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 2 minutes and 14 seconds long. I have listened to it once. In it, she said she didn't know what my grandmother had told me, that things were complicated and I only had one side of it, that she had always loved me even if things hadn't always been easy between us, that she hoped we could talk. I have not called back yet. I'm not sure I will, or at least not soon, and not with the purpose she's hoping for. What my grandmother left me, the money, yes, but more than the money, the accordion folder, the index card, the 60 years of keeping every card anyone had ever sent her, was not a weapon. It was a witness. It was evidence that someone had noticed, had documented, had chosen deliberately to say, "This happened, it mattered," and you were never as invisible as they made you feel. I framed the index card. It's on the wall above my desk where I plan lessons and grade papers, and sometimes sit in the early morning with coffee before the rest of the house is awake. She should know she was always seen. My grandmother's handwriting, which I have known since I was old enough to read, in blue ink on a white index card. I look at it every day. I think that was the point. There are people watching this right now who understand what it is to be systematically made smaller within a family. Not through dramatic cruelty, but through the accumulation of small absences. A photo not taken. A room no longer available. A guest list that shrinks by exactly one every year, with consistency so precise it cannot be accidental. Those absences leave marks that are hard to explain to people who haven't felt them, because they are made of nothing. Made of what wasn't there. But sometimes someone sees. Sometimes someone opens a file folder and writes on an index card and builds a record over decades without ever telling you, because they know that the telling would change what it is. Sometimes the witness is quiet all the way to the end, and then everything she saved becomes the loudest thing in the room. If you have someone like that in your life, someone who puts your card on the mantelpiece, tell them. Not because they need to hear it, because you do. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know. Has anyone ever seen you when you felt invisible? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. I'll see you in the next one.